We have for poor people. Who buys our
The voice behind the now viral rant, allegedly of VP and Chief Information Security Officer Martin Bally, now on leave amid an investigation.
Campbell Soup destroyed after getting exposed for unhealthy food. A Campbell Soup executive trashing his own customers and calling the company's food garbage for poor people is the kind of meltdown you do not forget. When that secret recording hit WDIV Detroit, I knew this was not a workplace rant. This was a company revealing itself. He talked about customers as if they were beneath him, as if the cans on grocery store shelves were nothing more than survival food for people he did not respect. I listened to him describe Campbell's Soup as unhealthy, low-grade, and meant for poor people, and I could feel the shock spreading across social media in real time. People who grew up with these cans in their kitchen cabinets could not believe someone inside the company would speak that way. The part that made the recording even harder to process was the tone. He did not sound like someone venting about a bad day. He sounded like someone speaking freely, someone who felt protected enough inside the company to let those thoughts pour out without hesitation. And when local outlets reported that the voice allegedly belonged to a Campbell vice president named Martin Bally, it changed everything. A quiet suspicion turned into a public betrayal. Hearing a senior executive belittle customers, employees, and the product itself hit people in a way I have not seen in years. A brand that relied on nostalgia suddenly became a symbol of arrogance and contempt. As I watched the reactions roll in, it was obvious that people were not just offended by the words. They were hurt by what the words revealed. Campbell's markets itself as warm, comforting, and honest. Generations have opened those cans during sick days, family dinners, and late nights when no one had the energy to cook. Hearing an insider treat that tradition like a joke created a crack in the image that no amount of corporate messaging could immediately fix. The betrayal felt personal, because food is personal. When someone insults what you feed your family, the trust you built over decades disappears in seconds. What made the situation even more surreal was learning how the recording came to exist in the first place. According to the lawsuit, the conversation happened during what should have been a simple salary discussion between Bally and a cybersecurity analyst named Robert Garza. I tried to picture the start of that meeting. Garza probably expected a straightforward conversation about compensation, nothing more than a routine check-in about responsibilities and future goals. Instead, the meeting allegedly spiraled into something entirely different. 75 minutes of ranting, frustration, and ugly commentary that seemed completely disconnected from the reason they were sitting in the room. As I pieced together Garza's account, I kept coming back to the moment the conversation supposedly shifted. Bally, according to Garza, began making comments about Campbell's ingredients. He talked about bioengineered meat and even claimed the chicken in the soup came from a 3D printer. I have heard plenty of whistleblower stories, but rarely have I seen someone in a high-ranking position disparage their own product with such confidence. If this truly happened, it raises a question that I keep returning to. What makes a person feel comfortable enough to speak like that behind closed doors? It takes more than frustration. It takes a belief that no one will hold you accountable. The most disturbing details were the racist remarks Garza says he heard about Indian employees. That was the moment, based on the lawsuit, when Garza began to feel he needed protection. I can imagine him sitting there, realizing the conversation had turned into something potentially dangerous for his career. In his position, I would have felt the same mix of disbelief and fear. When a person who controls your future starts speaking that freely, you understand how small you are in the eyes of an executive who believes he is untouchable. Garza decided to secretly record the conversation. I thought a lot about that decision, because it marks the moment the story stopped being internal and started becoming something bigger. Recording a vice president is not something you do lightly. It is the kind of choice that reshapes your relationship with your employer forever. Once he pressed record, Garza crossed a line that no employee wants to cross, but sometimes you do it because you do not trust the environment around you. According to the lawsuit, he kept the recording to himself at first, unsure of what to do next. In the days that followed, the weight of that recording must have grown heavier. Every time he replayed it, he must have been thinking about his job, his reputation, and what would happen if anyone else heard it. Eventually, he reported the comments to his supervisor in January. He probably expected at least a conversation or an acknowledgement that what he heard mattered. Instead, 20 days later, he was fired. The timeline is so tight that it is impossible not to question the company's motives. When a whistleblower brings forward a complaint that involves racist comments, quality concerns, and misconduct, termination should not be the response anyone expects. Garza's lawsuit accuses Campbell of retaliation, wrongful termination, and emotional distress. His attorney says he was blindsided and believed the company would thank him for coming forward. That line stuck with me because it reveals the gap between expectation and reality. Employees hear corporate slogans about treating workers like family, but when the moment comes to test those values, the reality often collapses. Garza believed he was doing the right thing. He thought leadership would protect him for speaking up. Instead, according to him, they pushed him out. I watched the public response unfold as details from the lawsuit spread. People were not just angry at the executive, they were angry at the possibility that a company would punish someone for trying to expose wrongdoing. The story moved beyond corporate misconduct and shifted into a conversation about trust. If a company cannot protect employees who report abusive behavior, how can customers trust the same company to protect their health, their safety, or their dignity? The story took on a life of its own. As more audio snippets came out, the betrayal grew deeper. People who had never questioned what went into a can of soup now found themselves reading ingredient labels and wondering how much of the executive's rant contained truth. The scandal became a mirror, reflecting every concern people already had about processed food, synthetic ingredients, and corporate culture. The controversy did not stay contained inside the company. It spilled into the public, and the conversation became bigger than Campbell Soup itself. When the recording finally went viral, Campbell moved faster than I expected. It was the kind of sudden shift you only see when a company realizes the story has already slipped out of its hands. Their first statement sounded like damage control drafted in a hurry, the kind of language that tries to steady the ship before anyone notices how hard the water is hitting the hull. They insisted the comments about 3D printed meat were not only wrong, but absurd, as if disbelief alone could erase what came out of their own executive's mouth. They stressed that the ingredients were safe, the suppliers were reliable, and the chicken was never touched by anything that even resembled lab-grown technology. But as I read each sentence, I noticed what they were trying to do. They were not arguing with the recording. They were arguing with the public reaction. They had no way to prove the voice was not Bally's, so they focused instead on proving that what he said was false, hoping the content of the rant would distract people from the nature of the rant itself. They reminded everyone that Bally worked in IT, not food production, as if his job title could somehow distance them from the impact of his words. It was a strange defense because it acknowledged his lack of authority while ignoring the weight of his position within the company. When someone high enough speaks freely, it does not matter which department he comes from. The damage is already done. Then there was the line about Garza being fired for good reason. It arrived like a brick thrown through a window with no explanation tied to it. They did not say he violated policy. They did not say he broke confidentiality rules. They did not say he misused company equipment. They simply announced that his employment ended for good reason and left the rest hanging in the air. That vague choice of words told me more than any detailed justification would have. When a company wants to reassure the public, it explains everything. When a company wants to silence a scandal, it hides behind phrases that mean almost nothing. Once the public realized the company would not give a clear answer, the conversation widened. The story stopped being about a recording and started being about the integrity of the food on store shelves. Florida's Attorney General stepped in and opened a consumer protection investigation. And that was the moment I realized the scandal had reached a level the company could not control. A routine lawsuit had turned into a state-level inquiry. That does not happen unless lawmakers believe there is at least a possibility that something deeper is worth examining. The investigation was not about Bally. It was about the products themselves. It was about what consumers were eating, what they were being told, and whether the gap between the two was bigger than anyone knew. As soon as the investigation became public, people across the country began questioning not only Campbell Soup, but every major food company using bioengineered components. The recording triggered a wider debate about how much consumers really understand about the food they buy. People who never cared about the term bioengineered were suddenly reading ingredient lists and looking up definitions. The conversation spread into discussions about synthetic additives, flavor enhancers, preservatives, and the use of ultra-processed ingredients in meals marketed as wholesome and comforting. It became clear that the rant was only a spark. The fuel had been sitting there the whole time. Public trust in major food companies has been weak for years, but something about this scandal cracked it even more. Maybe it was because the voice came from inside the company. Maybe it was because it confirmed the suspicion that many executives do not eat the products they sell. The worst possibility was that the people making decisions behind closed doors held the same low opinions of consumers that the voice in the recording expressed. That idea unsettled people, especially the ones who grew up thinking these brands were harmless household staples. The more I watched the reactions, the more obvious it became that this scandal was not only about Campbell's, it was about the entire relationship between corporations and consumers. People began confronting the reality that the food industry often relies on engineered flavors, sodium overload, and chemical additives to maintain taste and shelf stability while keeping costs low. The fact that a Campbell executive criticized his own products only made the conversation louder. Consumers asked themselves why someone inside the company would speak that freely unless he believed what he was saying. Even if his claims about 3D printed meat were wrong, the disdain behind them was real. That was enough to reshape public perception. This scandal revealed something uncomfortable about the culture behind the brand. When a senior executive mocks customers and employees, it exposes values that are not written in mission statements or printed on packaging. It tells you what some people inside the system truly think about the people they serve. Class divides that usually stay hidden suddenly come to the surface. Private judgments about workers and consumers slip out before anyone can pull them back. When the rant described the soup as food for poor people, it hit a nerve that went far beyond food safety. It exposed a hierarchy inside the company that many people suspected but never heard spoken aloud. The gap between public branding and private attitudes became impossible to ignore. Campbell's built its reputation on reliability, warmth, and family-centered marketing. The recording shattered that image. Hearing an executive describe the product as unhealthy and cheap forced consumers to question the honesty of every advertisement they had ever seen. If this was how insiders viewed the food, what else were they hiding? That question kept growing as more details emerged, especially when people began connecting the rant to long-standing concerns about synthetic ingredients, high sodium levels, MSG, and the engineered flavors that dominate processed foods. As I reached the end of this part of the story, I realized that the scandal did more than expose an executive. It exposed the distance between what companies want consumers to believe and what they say when they think no one is listening. Whether Campbell chooses to change will take time to see, but for the first time in a long while, the public has been given a clear look behind the curtain. The question now is what they will do with that truth. Subscribe, like, and comment why you like this video for a chance to win a new Apple MacBook.